Greg Young with Tully & Young for the County of Madera.
Melanie Aldridge for the Madera Water District.
Phil Jansen, Board Member, Madera Water District.
Brian Davis, Madera Irrigation District.
Tina Nolan, Madera Irrigation District.
Keith Helmuth, City Madera.
And I want to introduce our facilitator, Malka, and she is going to, I think, have the staff, county
Yes.
staff introduce
Hi,
themselves.
I'm Alka Coppell
And
from
our
Cal
engineers.
State Sacramento. I also wanted to introduce Angelica, who is available for translation. Anything you'd like to say? Thank you. And I'd like to turn over to Stephanie Agneson to introduce the staff.
Stephanie and Agneson, Madera County.
Pete Leffler with Ludorf and Scalmadini Consulting Engineers, part of the GSP consultant team.
Brian Thorson with David's Engineering, part of the GSP consulting team.
In here? Oh,
I'm Julia Van Horn. I'm with the facilitation team from Sacramento State.
Andrea Sandoval with Madera Irrigation.
thank you.
Thank you. Tonight we're going to have a discussion, a little small discussion about the coordination charter. Then we're going to have a summary of the Subbasin Joint GSP. Then there'll be an opportunity to do written comments, verbal comments, and then we'll talk about next steps. So let's move on to item 2, which is discussion about the Coordination Committee charter. Our charter says that on or before October 2019, the Coordination Committee will evaluate the effectiveness of the Coordination Committee and determine whether we want to continue as we are or form an alternative group. Do I have any discussion from? I think my recommendation would be is we continue with our current format until after the implementation.
Yeah, so I think the discussion with the technical experts and obviously the coordination committee will be the ones deciding this, but the thought is that we will continue the coordination committee through the adoption of the coordination agreement, which is the agreement with the 7 GSAs, and then that group will then take over with a coordination work group. Yes.
Okay. So does that, I know we need a motion to that effect, and I think it has to be made by the electeds, right? So, Brian, would you like to make a motion to that?
I move that we move forward with the formation as is.
And I will second that. And I'm going to see any more discussion. All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carried. Okay, we'll move on with item 3, summary. Oh, I just want to add, I have a previous engagement that I have to cut out of here right at 7, and I will turn leadership over to Brian at that time. So item 3, summary of the draft Madera Subbasin Joint GSP. Technical experts are the ones handling that. So who's first?
Let me make a quick announcement first. So as most of you know, the draft GSP has been out for public comment since early August. The comment period ends on November 2nd. Also, as I think most of you know, you can comment in writing via a form that is on the MaderaCountyWater.com site. We've been encouraging everyone at these regional meetings to attend your GSA meetings, as they are the decision-making bodies that review the plan. But we wanted to give you the opportunity, if you'd like, to make a comment to a regional body. Although the coordination committee is not a decision-making body, it can make recommendations to the GSAs. So we wanted to start with a refresher of the plan that is now posted on the website and has been for a couple of months. And the technical experts from the 4 GSAs will present it. After the presentation, we'll have some time for clarifying questions. But then later in the meeting, we'll have an opportunity to develop written comments if you haven't already, and we'll have some snacks in the lobby to help you do that. And then we'll also provide you some time, if you'd like, to read those comments out loud or make other a verbal comment on the draft plan. So that'll be the plan today. Okay. I think Melanie's going to start.
Yes.
I'll be advancing here.
All right. I'd just like to clarify, I'm not technically a technical expert. I'm an attorney. My technical expert had a family matter that he needed to attend to, and I offered to step in. So we're here to talk about the GSP, which is the shorthand phrase for Groundwater Sustainability Plan. If we could go to the next slide. So what is a Groundwater Sustainability Plan? Basically, it's a document that right now ours is in draft form that the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act requires each basin to have one or more plans covering their basin. In our situation, we have one GSP for 4 agencies and then 3 other GSPs from 3 other GSAs that overlie the basin. And together we're coordinating that. But just as an overview, the plan shows, if you look on the slide, it shows 2020. We turn in our plans January 31, 2020, and then we have 20 years from 2020 to 2040 to implement the plan. And the plan basically is for us to achieve sustainability, meaning our aquifers will not continue dropping down as they have. In 2040, then we're in the sustainability period. So the GSP talks about where the basin is now, the data we have, the data we want, and the types of projects or actions that we're going to take during this implementation period to get us so that we're in a sustainable situation for 2040 moving forward. Next slide. GSPs are very expensive documents. This GSP has gotten a lot of grants. Stephanie Nagnason, I think, has been the champion on that. We've been able to get a $500,000 grant for stressed basins from Department of Water Resources. We've been able to get a $1.5 million grant from DWR for the GSP. We have used local experts, consultants. We've had, as we'll talk, we've had feedback from the public. There have been lots of people looking at the data, looking at the GSP, and trying to figure out what our plan should look like so that we can get to sustainability by 2040. Included in that, as I said, is feedback from the public. We've had a coordination committee, and we've had GSA boards. City is a GSA, the county, Madera Water District, and Madera Irrigation District, Gravelly Ford, Newstone, and Root Creek all have GSAs, and we've all been talking to each other and looking at each other's data as we go along the way. Next slide. So in case any of you see your pictures up here, if you've been to multiple meetings, and I'm sorry for you, these are just show photos. Each of the GSAs has been having outreach, trying to get comments and information, concerns from the landowners and water users in each of their districts, and there's more outreach going on. These are just some of the pictures where we've gone over, if you've been to more than one of these things, we've gone over a lot of this stuff multiple times because it's a new law with some pretty large ramifications for everybody in the state. Next slide. So this slide shows a list of our previous workshops. We've had technical workshops in May, June. We had a groundwater workshop in August, another technical workshop in October. The coordination committee met on back in March. We had a couple of more technical workshops in April and May of 2019, and a coordination committee meeting on August 7th, 2019.
Thank you. Of the total subbasins, the joint GSP or the 4 GSAs represented here, they comprise about 94% or 325,000 acres of land. Of that, about 197,000 acres or 60% of the area is actually irrigated. The remaining about 37% is non-irrigated or rural residential, and 3% being urban uses, city in particular on that. Next slide, please. Now, the previous slide illustrates that ag use dominates on a per acre basis. In addition to that, it dominates by pure usage. Ag represents about 95% of consumptive use. Urban use is 5%. That's urban and rural residential. The table also illustrates that between 1989 and 2015, the irrigated crops moved more extensively towards nut crops, and that there was a reduction in the idle land uses. Next slide, please. At present, there's about 166,000 acre-foot shortfall. With the implementation of programs and projects proposed in the GSP, that shortfall would be reduced. Without that, the subbasin would continue on an unsustainable pace with regard to the aquifer. Next slide. Removal of the deficit or the shortfall is through a number of projects and programs. This shows 4 major categories. That's full utilization, recharge, participation with other GSAs or other agencies if necessary, and there would also be water conservation, which is not shown there. That would be, as an example, the City of Madera installing water meters. For each program and category shown on this list, there's a multitude of projects and programs associated with each of those, which you can find in Chapter 4 of the GSP. Let's see, I believe Greg is next.
There are a couple of it.
Nope, that was my bad. I'm here. Too many buttons to push. I get confused. Keith just gave us a quick highlight of part of the plan's approach to solving the sustainability objective, and that was the water supply project side. But we are in a situation, especially in the Madera County portion of the subbasin, the Madera County GSA portion of the subbasin, to have significant demand management occurring, which means reduction in consumptive use. And so we're going to need to be doing a lot of things, and exactly how that's going to occur, we're not defining just yet. We know there's a lot of ways to get towards demand reduction, and we're going to be working on several of those, working with advisory input from the Madera County GSA Advisory Committee. What's listed here is some examples of how we can achieve demand reduction. Through conservation easements. We could establish groundwater allocation programs that may or may not have some sort of market associated with those allocations. We could charge extraction fees. We could temporarily, let me just note that any of those things could work independently or together. Well, markets would have to work with an allocation, but we can do a lot of these things together, and how we get to our goals is going to be a fluid process, but we need to start reducing demand. We also recognize that we can't just go from today's use that you saw on the table that Keith showed a few minutes ago to an immediate reduction, because that has devastating effects to the local economy and to the agricultural operations. So we expect and intend that during that 2020 to 2040 period, there will be continued temporary use of stored groundwater at a declining rate. So we're going to move from kind of today's use to a much lower use and try and glide that down to a different position and by 2040. Recognizing that temporary use may also cause continued lowering of the groundwater, we are likely going to establish a mitigation for potential impacts to domestic dry wells as a result, if such impacts occur as a result of continued lowering of the groundwater. Next slide, please. So current options for demand reduction, again, these can be combined in a variety of ways. We talked about at so the county has an advisory committee that was established that has been meeting fairly regularly and having a lot of robust discussions. And in the couple of meetings in May, we talked a lot about allocations at the parcel level, about spreading everybody's water use out and everybody kind of having some portions of that. In October and November, we discussed the ideas of putting some water markets on top of that. Then later, we also started to talk about ideas of rentals or retirements or easements. So in other words, monies are used to take certain lands out of production or to change what's being grown so that they use market mechanisms to change production rather than having an allocation spread everywhere. So again, there's lots of different ways to approach this, but there are lots of considerations. So next slide, please. I apologize, I was getting ahead of myself on some things here. I thought there was what?
Do you want to go back?
Yeah, go back for a slide, please. There are a lot of considerations in any of these strategies that we have to be thinking about. There's administrative actions, there is the economic impacts, both at the county level and at the business level, which includes the farm business. There is tracking and measurement and monitoring that all goes into this. So exactly how we achieve demand reduction will be a work in progress, but I think the key takeaway that we want people to understand, that's documented fairly well in the GSP itself in Chapter 4, is that there is going to be a reduction in demand, a fairly significant reduction in demand that's going to need to occur, and most of that will be focusing within the Madera County GSA portion of the joint GSP's area that it is covering. Now we can go to the next slide. So with that demand reduction and with the surface projects that Keith had discussed earlier, the combination of those things are intended to allow us to get to a balance. So you can see on this graph, you see on the right-hand side an added kind of yellowish color there of 60,000 acre feet. That's the net benefit from projects, recharge projects that are intended. That doesn't mean we are finding ways to recharge or bring additional water in every year to get 60,000 acre feet. What that really means is every 3, 4, or maybe even longer, we get large chunks of water brought in, put in through recharge, put in different ways. We acquire that water so that on average, we're getting about a 60,000 acre foot benefit. The other column, you see the reduction down at the top of that groundwater extraction of about 100,000, a little over 100,000 acre feet. And what that is indicating is, and as the footnote at the bottom of this slide notes, that about 90,000 acre foot of demand reduction is expected to be occurring within the Madera County GSA. When that is combined with areas that might be coming out to create recharge basins and some other effects that are anticipated to occur, the net of that is about 105,000 acre feet. So that what we see here is the combination of demand reduction and some new supplies brought in to augment this basin's current supply situation. We try and reach a sustainable level so that between starting around in 2040 and going out for 70 years, and that's what the law says we have to try and project for, we see a sustainable level. In each year it's going to bounce around, but on average that's expected to be the occurrence out into the future. Next slide, please. I have these next two, I think, still, right? I forgot. Apologize. As we were noting, the intent during the 2020 to 2040 implementation period will likely have some continued impact on groundwater levels. And in this graph, you see the green lines. The one on the far left represents 2020. The one on the right represents 2040. So we have time moving from left to right on this graphic. What you see in the far left part of this graphic, it may be a little hard to see the colors here, but you see some blue lines with some points, and that is actual. This is a well. We're not going to say where exactly this well is, but there's a whole bunch of these wells that have been monitored and have been modeled all over the basin. This is a particular result from one of those wells as a representation. The blue line indicates actual historic groundwater conditions at that well location. So that was what was measured over time, in this case from about a little before 2000 through 2016. These were the groundwater elevations. And throughout the entire basin, it was modeled so that you could kind of see what might happen when we started putting in projects. And the brown line we see here represents the model's interpretation of what the history is. And we can see there's in this case, there's a fairly good correlation. So by that, we're trusting to some degree the direction that you see groundwater continuing between those green lines, which is a little bit downward. And then you see it start to rebound. So the result of implementing demand reduction and implementing new recharge projects, they take time, and we're expecting that as a result of that, there will be a continued lowering of the groundwater by some amount, and then it will start to rebound. And then it's going to bounce around depending on drought cycles and other things, but we expect it to be in a better position, or at least similar position to what we've experienced in the last 5 to 10 years as far as groundwater elevations. So what that recognizes is we need time to implement things, but that also means that there's the potential for some impacts. And so the joint GSAs recognize that that potential exists and are going to be working on how to address those concerns. So next slide, please. So a mitigation program for impacted drinking water wells is being discussed, and there is a ad hoc committee that's part of the advisory committee that is discussing some opportunities here and how to go about this. And the county is also working on an application for a $500,000 grant to start a comprehensive well inventory for domestic wells throughout the entirety of both this basin, Madero Subbasin, and the Chowchilla Subbasin. Possible mitigation actions could be replacing or lowering an existing well if it becomes impacted, potentially connecting to an existing or maybe even a new community water system to create a little more reliability in a water supply for those domestic users, and potentially staging and having the availability of temporary solutions. So if something does happen, it doesn't cause a long-term delay in being out of water. So maybe there's some tanks or some water, temporary water provision approaches that we can have staged places within the county. So if something does happen someplace, we can take care of somebody that's not out of water for a significant period of time until we get some of those other mitigation strategies in place. So these are the things being discussed. Possible types of support could include low-interest loans or grants to help do some of the activities. And they likely are going to require well owners to sign up for the program. It's hard for us to mitigate something where we don't know it exists, which is part of why we need to have a good well inventory too. So let's go to the next slide. This is jumping to you. Handing over to Dina now.
All right. So just in closing, if you guys would like more information or have not had a chance to look at the GSP yet, the GSP is available online through MadeiraCountyWater.com. Comments can be submitted and are actually going to be accepted through November 9th related to this GSP specifically. The other GSPs within the subbasin have slightly different timelines. So if you would like to look at the GSP, please access that website. If you would like to comment, then you can go ahead and submit the comments at the Madeira GSP comments at MadeiraCounty.com. I also just wanted to mention that the GSP does have chapters related to it. And again, this was just a very high-level summary presentation. But each topic that was discussed tonight, if you look in very fine red print on the slides, it actually tells you which chapter you can reference for more details on that information. And next slide. So the next steps for the GSP and these 4 GSAs represented up here is, again, we will be receiving comments on this draft GSP through November 9th, and there's also going to be an opportunity for you to submit both written and verbal comments tonight. The GSAs here, along with our consultants, David's Engineering, will be revising and responding to comments in November of 2019. In December of 2019, the GSAs at their individual GSA meetings the plan is to approve both the GSP and the coordination agreement. The GSPs will then be submitted, and these will be submitted in combination with the other GSPs within the subbasin. So Root Creek GSP, Newstone GSP, Gravelly Ford GSP, and our joint GSP, along with the coordination agreement, will be submitted in January of 2020. DWR will then have a public comment period of 60 days. They will then evaluate the plan, and if everything goes according to plans, they will then approve the plan. And with that, I will turn it back to Phil.
Okay. Item 4, discussion of the draft GSP.
Yeah, so we are going to, before we start the comment development agenda item, we wanted to give anyone a chance to ask questions, staff, about the presentation you just saw. You can come up and, if you don't mind.
Hey, good afternoon, good evening, actually. Angela Islas with Self-Help Enterprises. I just wanted to ask a clarifying question about the date to submit the comments. I think I heard from you that it was going to be submitted by November 2nd, but it says November 9th, so I'm just trying to, oh, you meant to say 9th? Okay, that's all I wanted to know. Yeah, sorry.
I had a couple of questions. I'm wondering if we already have typed up our comments, if we're required to use the form that you gave, or are we allowed to just submit comments if they're typewritten in Word?
So you do not have to use the form, and
Okay.
I do have your email that had the questions about the well mitigation, and we use that as a comment.
All right. I also have additional comments that I've typed up. Okay. And then are we allowed to ask questions about the GSP itself, even though it may not have been in the presentation today?
Yes, this is, yeah.
Okay. The first question I had was on section 257 of the Madera County Plan, there's data from the San Joaquin Valley Water Year Index. And in this index, you only use the years 1989 through 2014 and deleted the 2015 data. And I'm wondering how much difference there would have been if you had included the 2015 data. How much water would have been missing as a result of that?
This might be a question for Brian.
So the time period that you're looking at is the time period used for the historical water budget, and that needs to be representative of the longer historical time. So because of the dry period at the end of that period, for two reasons, we dropped off 2015 from that period. We dropped it off because we had limited data for groundwater level at that time, at the time that we were developing the plan, and we dropped it off because the period from 1989 to 2014 is better representative of the longer term average, but we didn't, it's not like we missed water by not using 2015, because we're in the budget, the years we're using are fully accounted for. So
I guess I'm a little bit confused. I'm just wondering, would it have made any difference if we'd included the 2015 data in the water budget?
it would have made the average amount of water that the basin received over that time period be less. It would have made it harder to be sustainable, actually.
Okay. That's a question. Do you know about how much that would have changed things, or?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay.
It wouldn't have made a lot of difference because it's a long-term average. 1989 through 2014 is the better period to use because it better represents the long-term average of San Joaquin Valley water years.
I understand the reasoning. Well, thank you. I also had a question on the domestic well mitigation program. And if I understand you correctly, if you go to page 5 of Appendix 3D, on there you estimate the yearly cost for the domestic well mitigation program at $277,000 a year. Is that correct?
Can you point me to the page again, page 5? I got it up. What, excuse me, what page?
It's page 5 of Appendix 3D.
That's the number, yeah. So, I mean, that's the number in the report, yes. Do you have, so what is?
And I guess the question is, by my calculations, when you take out the administrative costs of $150,000, you come up with $127,000 left for the wells themselves, and you said $30,000 per well in your appendix. I only come up with like 4 wells. It would certainly seem like there would be significantly more wells than 4 wells. So I'm wondering how you got that, and you know, if you could expand on how you arrived at that figure.
So At this moment, I can't expand on how we arrived at that figure. We had an economist actually did that work, and we have to look at the details, and we can sit down and compare your calculations to that. But depending on how you do assumptions and such, one of the things that they did was they looked at the time at when the wells went dry. So that then changed the figures, and then they spread that over the entire life of the period. So I'm not sure that your calculation is probably not exactly consistent with theirs. And I mean, what I want to say about this is also that, this is an attempt to put a number. It's a rough number. This is based on a database of domestic wells that we recognize is not perfect. And it's just to get an approximate number so that people have an idea of what the cost would be. And they've got the grant that they're working for to hopefully do a better inventory, and as we move forward, get a better idea of what these kinds of numbers will be.
Would it be possible to get the working papers or the calculations and how they were made?
I think it would be helpful for you to sit down with the economist or have a phone call with him. That would probably
Okay.
help, because it sounds like you want to walk through a bunch of the assumptions that he used in order to get that number. And
Right.
without channeling him, and I can't. I don't know that we can have that number. Okay? So
Okay.
we can
Thank you very
schedule a
much.
call with him, though.
Any other questions before we go to comments? Yes.
Greg, this is probably for you. With respect to the demand reduction, the 90,000 acre feet across the Madera County GSA, is the intent that that reduction be applicable to non-agricultural users as well, or is it just across ag users?
It's just ag users. I'm not Greg.
You're not Greg. That's good.
It's just ag users.
Is that set forth in the GSP right now? It's not clear to us that it is.
So I'm not sure there's a sentence that says that explicitly. We can go back in and take a look. I think that, in working with the county advisory committee, we are getting into a whole range of questions that are kind of beyond the scope of the GSP because they're kind of implementation period questions. But no, the intent is that is a reduction in agricultural demand.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. In terms of the modeling that was done, it was modeled as exclusively ag water demand reduction.
Any more questions? Okay. Yes.
Good evening, this is Bill Dietrich. The question specifically for Greg, the 90,000 acre feet that was just referenced does not include any supply enhancements that we may be able to come up with along the way, correct?
It does include the supply enhancements, and if we were to go back to one of the graphics we had up that showed the 60,000 that was kind of that yellow-orangish, and the 105,000 acre foot drop down in demand, those combinations are what get us to the sustainability. So the 90,000 is recognizing the projects bringing new water in that
Which
equate to
could
about
possibly
60,000.
be optimistic, and
Which could also be
so we may
optimistic.
be looking at a larger number than 90,000. Then the follow-up question to the question that was just asked: what water use does the county GSA have other than ag and de minimis?
Municipal use, like small community water systems, are not considered de minimis. De minimis is only a domestic well that's 2 acre feet or less for domestic
Anybody
purposes.
have a estimate on what that number is?
We had estimated it's not big. Your point is, the majority of it is agriculture,
Right.
and that's,
Yes.
but there is some noise that might be other uses besides that are not considered de minimis.
And then the follow-up question in regards to the domestic mitigation program, because we have got another train coming down the track, because the Central Valley Regional Water Control Board Basin Plan amendments have been adopted by the state board. And we are going to be faced with creating water management zones, water quality management zones here in the near future. And I think the GSP has to make an accommodation in it for some kind of language that someday, maybe not so far in the distant future, we may be having to look at consolidation, merger, collaboration with other public entities that may be formed because of statute that are not, they're just non-funded mandates. And although the geography might not be exact, the mission is going to have a lot of overlap. So I guess that's more of a comment than a question, but that'll be it. Thanks.
Any more questions?
Jeff Vandenheuvel, Milk Producers Council. Just a question for the technical people. In the executive summary, there's this concept of confidence interval, and it creates these huge, it's 25% on either side of your estimates of extraction and inflows and so on. Is that genuinely what you believe? I mean, it could be as much as 25% in either direction off, or can you give us a little bit of context on what we are to make of this chart, which executive summary chart, table 1?
Yes. So there's a lot of uncertainty with water measurement. We don't have measurement of pumping at all. We're estimating that based on evapotranspiration and estimated efficiencies and information we have on crops. And there's uncertainty in that. We're just acknowledging that. This is the best estimate that we think is available, that we know is available.
Okay, just, your range, when you go 25% on either side, your plus or minus could be extraction as low as 335 and as high as 559, which is, I mean, it's just a little hard given all of everything that we've spent, right? That this is as close as we can get.
It would be nice to be closer, but this is based on best professional practices, why this is about what we expect that uncertainty to be for that. When we are implementing, why we're watching groundwater levels during the time, and we're doing adaptive management, and we're making adjustments along the way. If we have to do less, why that's great. If we have to do more, why that's not so good. But
I guess my observation representing stakeholders is that we're being asked to figure out how to operate our businesses with a whole lot less water when water's what we need to operate. And to have these kind of error bars, I mean, I guess I would say until these numbers get a lot more refined and we have a lot more confidence in them, we should be very careful about doing things that will cause economic damage. That's it for me.
Carl Jansen, on your 90,000, and I don't know, maybe I'm interpreting this wrong. If we glide down from 0 to saving 90,000 per year over 20 years, that means, in my mind, the way I look at it, that means 10 years, I divide it in half, that we're going to lose for 10 years 90,000 acre feet, or basically 1 million acre feet over the 20 years that we're planning on overdrafting?
Sorry, is that, are we asking a clarifying question on this?
Yeah.
The idea is, yeah, I mean, 90,000 acre feet a year right now. The subbasin uses, let's see, at 100 and, what's our number, 100, so it uses about 400,000 acre feet of consumptive use a year, I think, in this subbasin roughly. So you go 20 years of that number, that's a significantly higher number.
That would be 2 million.
So, yeah,
Basically,
we're talking about a
and so we
close
do
to
half of
50%.
it, it'll be 1 million over the 20 years.
That's one way to look at it.
Okay.
Yeah. It's
Then
90,000.
I'm interpreting it right then.
Yes, we need to be, in 20 years from now, we need to be using about, again, if things are following where we're projecting, and this is a plan, this is a plan setting forth a direction, and we're trying to move in that direction. And as we monitor, we may find improvements. We may find we don't need to do as much, or we may find we have to do more. That we, by 2040, are projecting that we're going to have to reduce the equivalent of 90,000 acre feet a year. First year, as discussed in the plan, we're talking about if you want to get to that 90,000 by year 2040, that the first year you're going to try and do, what do we say, about 80 or about a couple thousand acre feet reduction. And then you add another couple thousand to that. And each year you start to increment. And in the first 5 years, we were trying to do 10% of that. So by first 5 years, we're going to be 9,000 acre feet less.
So it's actually going to be worse than what I'm thinking.
Or better.
Worse.
Transition.
If you don't get.
Which side is worse? Which is worse?
Worse. Oh, the overdraft is going to be, that we
Right.
take is going to be more.
And that's what's in the graph that we showed represents this glide path. And so that is already projecting. So it's not worse than what's shown in the plan. And so if you're asking about what's in the plan, to clarify that, the graphs that are in there are representative of a glide path assumed.
And so if
As
we don't,
opposed
if
to
we don't make that 2% every year, well, it'll be 5% 20 years, we need to gain 5% each year. If we don't make that, the graph is going to be worse.
The overdraft potentially would be worse, right? And which would show we're not meeting our sustainability objectives, which would mean we'd have a problem and we'd be running into potential undesirable results that are reported and discussed in section 3, right, of chapter 3.
I just wanted to make sure I was looking at this right, that we're going to do a lot of overdrafting yet.
Well, and I want to clarify again, when we talk about this as the joint GSP, there's 4 agencies up here of the 7 in this subbasin that represent the majority of the acreage, 95% of the acreage. One of those GSAs, the county, represents a significant portion of that, and that is where the majority of this is going to occur. MID and some of the others have other resources.
Yeah, I understand that.
Okay, I just want to make sure that's clear, that we're not all.
Yeah, okay.
Any more questions? All right. Thank you.
Sorry. Now we are going to, I guess, kind of adjourn. We have refreshments. We're going to develop written comments. Do we have a time period that we're placing on
I
this?
think we're allocating about half an hour. It just depends on, it can be less if you're speedy. We just wanted to give an opportunity for you to submit comments in writing here. The staff will be here out in the lobby if you want to engage them, if you have any more questions. And then after, we'll come back here. And if you want to deliver your comments verbally, you can. You do not have to. You can just turn in your written comments. You can also, of course, turn in your written comments at any time after this meeting, but before November 9th. We just wanted to give you the opportunity now if you'd like. So,
Let's say 7:15.
yeah, let's say 7:15. I think the pizza is arriving 7-ish.
Yeah, there's
Okay.
supposed to be pizza at 7.
Okay. So, all right.
In the lobby.
You can also stay here if you'd like.
All right, we'll call this back to order here, get back to go with our meeting, and at the moment here, we will start with the written comments, and you can submit your written comments here at the podium, and you can even verbally announce them, or you can leave them there, and you don't have to publicly announce them if you want them to be recorded as record. So any written comments that want to be dropped off can do that. And if there's none of those, then we'll go straight into verbal comments, and we'll start the verbal comment section now.
Anybody have any verbal comments to make? You do. Okay. And if you wouldn't mind signing in.
Sorry.
And if you did write them down, we'll take them also.
No, this was submitted as a letter
Okay.
earlier this week.
Okay.
And for those of you that got this letter, this is really just a synopsis of that. My name's Jason Howard. I'm here on behalf of Gunner Ranch West. Just an overview of a rather lengthy letter that was submitted to the staff earlier this week. I would ask that, given that Madera County's GSA geographic region, its disparate and expansive distribution, and in light of Sigma's requirement that each GSA avoid undesirable results, the Gunner family would ask that either A, management areas be formed within the Madera County GSA to address this geologic variability within the GSA area, and this would help better tailor allocations and any other demand reduction programs that the county engages in, and would also avoid any kind of arbitrary application of the GSP across that expansive area. Also, Gunner Ranch would like that there be an explicit, it be made explicit within the GSP that non-ag users are the focus of the demand reduction, as I inquired about earlier this evening, and that in any event that any programs engaged in terms of demand reduction through the GSP be done so reasonably and rationally as tied to the variability across the county area. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other verbal comments? You're taking the long way around?
Good evening, Madeline Harris from Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Most of my comments are things that I've said before at GSA meetings and advisory committee meetings, so I feel like a little bit of a broken record, but wanted to get this on the record for this evening's listening session as well. So in reviewing the GSP and listening to the presentation, overviewing the plan, and in attending the meetings, it's become clear that the way that the plan is drafted really does prioritize irrigation as the highest use of water when state requirements are to prioritize drinking water as the highest use, and when there's state requirements protecting the human right to water. So while we are grateful that there's talk of establishing a mitigation program for domestic well users, clearly that's not enough in light of those requirements. Furthermore, the GSP appears to be incomplete because the project and management actions haven't been finalized or fully fleshed out yet, especially when it comes to how we're going to achieve that extra demand reduction that's needed. So that's a significant gap that we see in the plan. And, you know, the GSAs and the county at large do have a responsibility to their constituents that don't have the means to replace their wells if ever they go dry, to protect their drinking water resources. And so we will be submitting written comments detailing this more fully, but just wanted to express those concerns once again, and also clarify, no matter what decisions are made from here on out, there's going to be economic damage to someone. If domestic wells go dry, there will be economic damage to residents who are going to have to purchase bottled water in order to meet their daily needs. Oftentimes our organization partners with communities where folks are having to spend $200 a month buying bottled water because they can't rely on what's coming out of the tap because it's contaminated or there's nothing coming out of the tap. And for folks with low incomes, that's a very big burden. So I just wanted to ask the question, you know, economic damage to who? And obviously our organization supports working people who live in disadvantaged communities, and just wanted to highlight and elevate those needs and the responsibilities of the subbasin to those people. So thank you.
Anyone else? Okay.
Okay, if those are the last of the verbal comments, we'll move on to the next steps. The next meeting will be held December 2nd at 4 p.m. here at the Board of Supervisors chamber. If that's it, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.